Life hands us difficult experiences that weigh us down: despair, anxiety, sorrow, darkness, and feelings of meaninglessness. In the midst of all of this, God holds out precious and life-giving gifts: hope, peace, joy, love, light, and purpose. This Advent season, we will reflect on the gifts given to us by the greatest giver of all, and how we can receive and embrace those gifts, even in the most difficult of times.
Well, as you've heard, today is the first Sunday in Advent, the season in the church year that marks the time leading up to the birth of Jesus. Signs of the season are all around us. Many of our neighborhood homes are alit with the glow of Christmas lights around our windows. Some of us have already decorated. How many of you spent the weekend putting up the Christmas tree? We sure did. And when you enter a store, you are met with decorations and can't miss holiday deals. And if this isn't sign enough, our calendars quickly fill with events and celebrations, right? But did you know that Advent is more than busy schedules and calendars? Did you know that it is more than decorations and consumer deals? Advent is a season where churches around the world and across denominations mark this time of waiting, anticipation, and hope that God will come and be birthed among us. We wait to celebrate what God did long ago through Jesus in a stable in Bethlehem. But we also mark during this time in Advent the ways that God continues to be born among us, the way that God continues to transform our world, the ways that our world is not yet as God intends. And so since the 5th century, Christians have used this time to mark the ways that we celebrate both how Jesus was born long ago and how we wait and watch for God to come again among us, and to live in this space with hope, trusting that God will keep God's promises. Now, I don't know about you, but I need both of these spaces. I need set-aside time in my life and in our world to recognize that things are hard, that there are confusing and challenging and difficult things in our world, and that God promises to be present to us through them and to redeem them. And so throughout Advent, we proclaim that God will exchange our despair for hope, our anxiety for peace, our sorrow for joy, our fear for love. God promises to be with us through every time and every season, redeeming and healing us. For all of creation is waiting for God to do this work. We are not alone in longing and clinging to hope for God to be present among us. You might remember this passage from Romans 8, which says, "The whole creation has been groaning together," and not only creation, but we ourselves groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what one already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. I love this passage because it reminds me that I'm not alone in longing for the world to experience healing. I'm not alone in groaning and waiting for God to be present among us. And in fact, it's not just humanity that waits, it's all of creation that hopes for God's redeeming work. Around the world, there are millions of people today who are waiting and longing for healing. Millions who have lost someone they love, a child or a parent, a sibling or a friend. There are many of us who are celebrating a first holiday this year without somebody we love. And maybe this is you, too. Maybe you are entering this holiday season with your grief mingled with hope, longing for God's presence. Maybe it feels particularly heavy this year, even if you can't quite name why or how. Beyond our personal weariness, there is this global sense of groaning and waiting too. Did you know in the West Metro, 5% of our population struggles to meet basic needs like housing, access to medical care, and food or clothing. And around the world, there are millions of people who have been displaced from their homes because of things like climate change, because of war, because of unstable governments, or other reasons. In fact, I learned this week that the UN estimates that there are 120 million displaced refugees around the world. That's 1 in every 69 people. That's a lot of hurt. That's a lot of groaning and waiting and longing for healing, isn't it? And this is a season, Advent, that can carry these burdens and offer us hope. And so as we begin this season, let me say to you, if you are one whose heart is aching, if you feel despair or depression or grief or this general heaviness, I just want you to know that you are not alone. And I don't want you to let the excitement and the flurry of the season feel like you don't have a place here. If you can't be merry and bright, don't convince yourself that you are to be left behind. Because, dear one, this season of Advent is for you. The gifts and the promises of the birth of Jesus is for you who feel heavy and despair and grief and maybe a little bit alone. This is a time where we bring our whole selves, everything that we are carrying, and we will meet face to face the tender and loving image of God. God meets us in the hardest places of our lives, but God does not leave us there. What do we say around here? The worst thing is never the last thing. God promises to meet us in the depths and the shadows, the lonely places of life, and bring us with all of creation into a place of healing and hope. Now, every week throughout this season, we will mark our time together by lighting these Advent candles, and we will sing that beloved song, "O Come, O Come, Emmanuel." This is one of my favorites of the season, and let me tell you why. Because this song is a prayer as much as it is a word of promise and hope. As it begins, we say, O come, Emmanuel." Emmanuel means God with us. So we are praying and asking that God be here among us. And then we sing, "And ransom captive Israel that mourns in lowly exile here." When we say ransom, we mean God save us. So we're saying, dear God, come and be among us. Save us from the things that make us exiled, from the places where we are lonely, from the ways that we feel despair. And then every verse closes out with that beautiful rejoice, rejoice that reverberates throughout the space. Just notes of hope and promise that bounces off the walls, bounces off our hearts, and we are reminded that God promises to be present to you and with you. And so even while there is much in the world to be worried about, there is also something to hold on, to give much rejoicing as well. Hope is not only the word for our day, it's a word for this season, because we hope that the ache and despair we feel in our hearts will disperse. We hope that the ways of our world will meet the desires and the ways of God. We hope that just as Jesus was born long ago, that Jesus will be born again among us. I've been thinking this week about the places that we encounter hope in our lives, maybe places that we have regularly prayed for hope in our lives. And I thought of the prayer of St. Francis. Do you remember this one? It begins, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy." And you know, I'd never considered this an Advent prayer before, but it seems to hit all the right notes, doesn't it? It brings together everything that we're holding in our heart and asks God to transform those hard feelings, those feelings of hatred and doubt, despair and sadness, and exchange them for things like love and faith, hope and joy. I'll admit that as I read this prayer, I'm comforted by this really simple binary exchange. It gives me peace to think that swapping out these feelings and experiences in my life are so easy, that the good will conquer the bad, that doubt has no match for fear, that despair will be knocked out by hope, and that even if I feel sadness now, joy will come in the morning. But it rarely works that quickly, does it? It hardly comes that easily, right? And so then I began to wonder, what if we are meant to allow these feelings to coexist? What if this is meant to remind us that even when there is doubt, we can also have faith? Even when there is despair, we can still hope. Even in the darkness, we can still see light. Can't sadness and joy coexist? I know they have in my life. Actually, they have this weekend in my life. One of my kids has been really interested in learning the history of our family, and recently that has included learning the history of every piece of jewelry that I own. And so he goes through my box and he pulls out piece after piece and wants to hear the story. Unfortunately for him, most of them say, the story is, I found it at Target, or I got it at a garage sale. But there's a few pieces that have a little bit more meaning, and one of them is this opal ring. It is a beautiful opal ring in this rose gold setting and has been passed down from generation to generation throughout my family. And so I tell him that my grandma received this as a gift from her uncle, and then she gave it to my mother, who gave it to me. And now I have been holding on to this beautiful opal ring. And as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking about all the stories and all of the love of our family and these memories, and I'm starting to feel sad, this sort of nostalgic sadness and grief. And right when I'm starting to get stuck in it, my little one looks at me and he goes, "So when you die, do I get that one?" I guess. His curiosity melted away all of my sadness, but there it was together, sadness and joy commingled. And it happens all the time. Sadness and joy are dance partners, aren't they? So too are doubt and faith, despair and hope. They dance and move together throughout our lives. The light shines in the darkness, but without the gift of the night sky, how could we ever see the stars that shine? Now, actually, this coexistence of emotions has been long recognized. Viktor Frankl, whose name you might recognize, he's an author, a Holocaust survivor, and a psychologist, coined the term tragic optimism. He says that tragic optimism is when we fully recognize the suffering and the despair around us, and we still choose to move forward with hope. It gives us permission, this tragic optimism, to feel a full range of emotions, to recognize that life is far from perfect, to know that we can feel happy and sad, loss and possibility, despair and hope, and that by holding these together as dance partners, we'll find our way through. But what does that actually look like, to hold despair and hope as dance partners throughout our life? I want us to look to that last stanza of St. Francis's prayer, because I think it offers us some guidance. It closes this way: "O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life." And the thing that I notice here is that each verse, as we move through this stanza, moves us from receiving toward acting. It asks God to guide us away from focusing only on our own needs, and instead being aware of the world and the needs around us. And it tells us that in doing so, in giving to others, we will receive, right? Healing and transformation comes when we can look up and look around. Hope finds its wings by our care and our connection of one another. Just this weekend, actually last night on my drive home from Thanksgiving, I read this piece in the New York Times, And it's called How Not to Fall into Despair. And I thought, well, that seems pretty timely for today. So here's what I learned yesterday. This piece lifts up that our ability to hold these opposing feelings, hope and despair, joy and sadness, that our ability to do this actually increases our resilience. There's science behind this that I don't understand, but it's true. It increases our ability to be resilient and to navigate difficult times in our lives. And so simply choosing hope is an act of resilience. It is a reminder and a proclamation in itself that the worst thing is not the last thing. And then they say that we are to put that hope into action. And that will combat our despair in a few ways. And so this article suggested that we lean into community, that we find small routines that support our mental health, and that we allow ourselves to feel the full spectrum of emotion, to feel sadness and despair, but also hold on to that hope. Now, sometimes we need real professional and medical guidance to help us navigate this connection between despair and hope. And if that's you right now, seek it out when you need it. I believe that God gave us the gift of medicine and therapy to be resources of help for us, to be one of many tools in our box. But as we see, God has given us many ways to help us tend to our hearts, to navigate this space of despair and hope. And actually, I want to share one practical technique with you that I have learned. If you are ever in a place where you are feeling stuck, and that hopelessness or despair, that anxiety or grief, whatever that feeling is, just won't move, and you feel stuck in this space, here's my tip for you. It's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 coping technique. Has anyone heard of it? Yeah, we got a few head nods. Lucky for you, all of you are going to hear about it now. So here it is. Again, this is just a helpful way when you're feeling like you can't move from these places. Ground yourself, sit, find a comfortable center, take some deep breaths. And then you're going to look around, name 5 things that you can see. A friend, a flickering candle, the cross on the wall. Then you're going to notice 4 things that you can touch. The fabric under your fingers, the bulletin in your hand, the feel of someone leaning against you. And you're going to listen for 3 things you can hear. The baptismal font, a car driving by, your stomach rumbling. 2 things you can smell. The soap that you use to wash your hands, the coffee making its way in from across the hall. And then lastly, what's 1 thing you can taste? That gum or mint that you're chewing, leftover toothpaste. I'm rushing through this a bit, but can you feel already just your nervous system start to calm, your head and your heart and your body start to connect? And those emotions and feelings that were once stuck begin to move, because this is a way to remind yourself that you are not alone and you don't need to stay where you are. You can acknowledge what's happening inside and around you, and you can move through it. 𝗿𝙗 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗵 is a professor at the 𝚤𝙚 School of Theology, which is one of our Methodist seminaries, and it's located in Colorado. He defines hope in this way. He says, hope is the courage to embrace reality and to act even when odds are in favor of defeat. He says hope is an act of resistance, because having hope means that you are brave enough to believe that your life and our world can change. As Christians, we have hope because we are brave enough to believe that God will work through us to be that change. And so Advent is this time that gives us these 4 weeks, set-aside space to practice hopeful resistance. It's a season where God promises to fill that gap between the way the world is and the way that God intends it to be. And that through Jesus, we can trust that God's promises will be fulfilled. Jesus, too, was born into a world filled with conflict and division. Life was difficult and unpredictable. The people lived under a watchful eye of the empire and had much to feel despair. In that turbulent time, Jesus was born not as a powerful king, but as a baby. In his birth and throughout his ministry, Jesus was surrounded by those who were vulnerable and marginalized and hurt, those who felt the most despair. And Jesus brought to them transformation and healing and hope. He called those who least expected it to be his followers. He healed those who felt that they had no hope of recovery. He ate with those who had been cast aside. Jesus invited everyone he met to live with this brave sense of resistance called hope. Hope that the worst thing is not the last thing. Hope that God has and will heal and redeem our world. We know what that world looks like because we hear of it in Revelation 21. It says, "Look, God's dwelling place is among God's people. They will be God's people, and God will be with them. God will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." As Christians, we are invited to let these words and actions of Jesus shape our own lives. We too are called to be a people of hope, a light shining in the darkness. Now, as Pastor Tammy mentioned at the start of our service, every year we lift up 2 Christmas offering recipients. This is one way that we embody hope through this season. Every dollar we raise is an act of resistance against despair. Every dollar is an act of hope, offering this to someone who is in need. And it makes a difference. This year, we're supporting 𝗚𝗶𝗳𝗁, who helps decrease homelessness and provides security to our neighbors. Now, I read that since 2018, Minnesota has seen a 19% decrease in the number of children experiencing homelessness. Now, any children with housing insecurity is too many, but that's a huge decrease, and that's done in part because of this act of resistance we call hope that's done through organizations like 𝗚𝗚𝗂, like individuals like you who help, like government programs. Now, last year, 𝗚𝗶𝗳𝘁, who is our other recipient, was able to respond to hundreds of humanitarian crises. They are able to help people and communities rebuild after things like hurricanes and fires. They help people find hope in their futures and to believe that they are not alone. Now, our work is not yet finished. I know that there is much in our lives and our world to feel weary about. But we are a people of hope who trust that God has and will continue to bring healing and transformation. And you, dear ones, are recipients of this promise. This season of Advent is a gift for you and for all people, to be a light in the darkness, to be a sign of hope amid despair, a promise that God is with you now and always. And so whatever it is that you are carrying today, whatever your worries or despair or grief, remember this. God is Emmanuel, God with you, and you are not alone. I want to invite you to pray with me these words from St. Francis as we close today. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, do one more. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.